Welcome to Crescent City Crime, dear listeners. I'm Tracy,
And I'm Brian.
and we really hope that you guys kind of forgive us. We know that this episode's out a little bit late today, but y'all, I had to work on 4th of July, and it was a very busy day for ribs.
Oh, yes, definitely.
Very busy
Excellent
day.
best ribs I ever tasted from the restaurant's name is Pig Out. Is that correct?
It is.
Yes,
That's where I
yes.
work. If anybody wants to come in there and get my autograph, I'll give it to you if I'm working. um,
Best brisket I've ever had in my whole life, either.
Either or ever.
I mean, ever. I mean, yeah. Also, yeah. Best ribs I ever had in my life. Best brisket I've ever had. Um, Pig Out doesn't play, people. They have a smoker in that restaurant. It's not a ghost kitchen like other places in town. Um, and yes, I believe what the brisket smoked for 12 hours.
No, it's like smoke for 6 hours, but there's a 6 hour holding time.
Okay, so that's how it comes out to 12 hours.
That is how it comes out to 12 hours.
Yeah.
So, but my point is that I was just dog tired. So, we're recording this episode late, and of course, another reason why we are late today is because we unfortunately have had to bid farewell to a very good person who was working with us. William, if you ever listen to this, it was truly a great thing to work with you, and we know that you'll be back.
It's such an honor to know you, sir. You are totally awesome. You are larger than life.
He's from Texas, so of course he is.
But yes, we're talking about Will is an amazing chef from the Austin area.
Yeah.
Any restaurant that has him working in the kitchen is very privileged and fortunate to have him around for sure.
Very much so, and I mean, he better subscribe to this podcast. That's all I'm going to say. I gave him one of our stickers, and I said, if you want to hear us talk all the time, you just got to subscribe here, and you'll hear us every week. Speaking of, we're on the social medias. Everything will be linked in the show notes. Make sure to tell your friends, but especially
Tell your enemies, especially your enemies.
we appreciate any ratings or reviews. Please make sure that you are subscribed to us on your preferred podcasting platform, and of course YouTube. So make sure that you subscribe to us on all the things. Hit the likes, make some comments, whatever you can do to please the algorithm beast.
Yes. Get if you love listening to us, yes, get your friends and family to do so as well. We love to talk to you.
If they're over the age of 18.
Yeah, preferably over the age of 18.
Although I would like to know if any like 16-year-olds are listening to us, and that would actually be pretty cool. I don't know how many of the younger set has been listening to us, but if y'all are, hey, we're glad that you listen to us.
Yes, thank you. And it's always free to listen to us as well.
It is always free. Just takes you a little bit of time. So we do have some recommendations. We have a restaurant recommendation. If you're ever out in the New Orleans area, go across the river to Gretna. Go eat at this place called Da Wabbit. It's DAWABBIT. It's like Kill Da Wabbit, like the old Bugs Bunny cartoons.
Yeah.
So really amazing fried chicken that I had, and pork. It was bacon wrapped pork medallions
In an orange glaze sauce.
So good.
I was very smart in ordering it. I ordered it with for my two sides. I requested regular French fries and sweet potato fries, and I dipped both of those fries in the glaze sauce as well.
Really
So it was especially delicious, juicy, tender pork medallions, which is it's the first time I've actually ordered that in a restaurant, and I was just amazed. It was tender, juicy, and tasty. And hey, I mean, the fries were delicious in that orange glaze sauce.
Yes.
This is typical of New Orleans cooking. There's just so many excellent choices.
Yeah, and that's where we took our friend William to for his farewell dinner. That's why we're late today.
Yep.
I'm gonna just keep saying how late we are, because I have nothing else better to talk about. But in fact, I do have something better to talk about today, and that is we went to go see Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny earlier this week. No spoilers, but I will say it was a very satisfying action adventure movie.
Yes, and I found it to be a very satisfying end to the Indiana Jones franchise. Okay, as there's a couple of things that I won't say what they are. There's a couple of things that fans were looking for that did happen in the movie.
Yeah.
Okay, you might, who knows, if you're a hardcore indie fan, you just might have already figured out what I'm talking about, but you're probably not going to know how it happens in the movie. Sometimes that's the whole thing. Is you know something's going to happen in the movie. It's just a question of how does it happen, when does it happen, and some of the things you'll see in the movie will tell you, okay, Indy's going full circle here. But all very pleasing, especially the opening.
Yeah, the opening was really, really wicked.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The opening is one of those, like, how the opening to, let's see, it was the Last Crusade. Harken back to the young Indiana Jones. Okay.
Right.
Well, the opening to this harkens back to Indiana Jones while he was, working with Office of Strategic Services during World War II.
Right.
Okay. But that's all I'm going to say.
Yeah, and
opening was lots of fun.
I also need to add that we are not sponsored by anything to do with Lucasfilm or DeWabbit. These are just recommendations.
Yes, just recommendations of a good restaurant, great food, and
a good movie.
Yeah, a very good movie, a very fun movie, and that's the bottom line. The movie was fun. And if you want to catch up on some Indiana Jones stuff before seeing the movie, or even after the movie, like if you have access to Disney Plus, I highly recommend The Young Indiana Jones Adventures. Okay, it's about, I believe it's like 23 episodes. It was just one season, but they fit a lot of episodes in, especially by today's standards. The first few episodes are Indiana Jones at, I believe, 9 years old. Being tagged along, being dragged all over the world to explore the world because his dad is this professor who's tenured, and he's invited to give lectures all over the world. Okay, and then later on, Sean Patrick Flannery plays Indiana Jones as the teenager who lies about his age to get into the Belgian army to fight the evils of fascism during World War One. Okay, and it's amazing storytelling. For those of us who are Star Wars fans, there's Ian McDiarmid appearing in one of the later episodes, an episode called Paris that was actually written by Carrie Fisher. There's Christopher Lee in one of the World War One episodes playing yet another Count, although I'm pretty sure this is before Star Wars Episode 2.
Yeah, we did the math. It was definitely before Star Wars Episode 2.
Yeah. And like another thing, you have the actor who played Admiral Ozzel from Empire Strikes Back, playing a not so competent British commander, okay, who Indiana Jones is serving under. And let's see, you also have Harrison Ford himself in, it could have been episode 20 or 21, 22, where he of course he plays Indiana Jones in a 1950 sequence, which has a backstory with the young Sean Patrick Flannery.
What exactly
Indiana Jones
was the time period that the TV show takes place? Because it's young Indiana Jones. I know that most of the movies take place
early 1900s.
Okay.
To the early 20s.
To the early 20s. Okay.
Early to mid 20s. Yeah.
Because I know, like, a lot of the is it 3 of the movies that take place during the rise of the Third Reich, or am I misremembering that?
Okay. Raiders of the Lost Ark takes place before World War II. It's during the 30s. Okay. whereas you have a small contingent of Nazi German forces in Africa. I'd say a small contingent because the Germans weren't in Africa in force until the Italians were getting their act ruined by the Brits, and then the Germans came in, and well, it's another discussion. And let's see here. The Last Crusade is, of course, taking place
during World War II, because there was a part where Hitler signs the book for him.
I think it's actually just before.
Oh, just before.
It's only just a few years after Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Okay.
Temple of Doom, as far as like.
Well, I think, did it say like 1934 or something, like at the very beginning?
1934 for Raiders of the Lost Ark, probably, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because Hitler had control of Germany. The Nazis controlled Germany by that point. Yes.
But Temple of Doom's a prequel to all that.
Yeah, Temple of Doom takes place earlier than that. If I had to guess, probably just a few years early. This is just a guess, folks. Temple of Doom probably takes place around 1930, 1931, 32, somewhere in that neighborhood.
Right.
Okay. So chronological order, yes, I know, starts with Temple of Doom, Raiders of the Lost Ark, Last Crusade. Let's see, Crystal Skull, because Crystal Skull's Cold War era. Okay.
Right.
And of course, this is not a spoiler. Dial of Destiny takes place in 1969.
Right.
Okay. Everybody knows this is when he's looking at retirement.
Yeah.
Because I think he's about 80 years old by this point.
In real life too, isn't he? Harrison Ford?
Or maybe the character's like in his early 70s at this point.
I don't think Harrison Ford's 80 yet, is he?
Let's see.
Oh wait, you know what? We have this wonderful device.
Yeah, he's pretty close to that.
Right in my hand, and I'm googling.
And I'm pretty sure this is his last.
Not so live on this podcast. I am googling Harrison Ford's age.
This is Harrison Ford's. This is Harrison Ford's last Indiana Jones movie. I'm pretty sure of that. Also very likely this is.
Oh, he's exactly 80 years old. And
exactly.
What did you know? His birthday, as of this recording, is in about a week. July 13th. He was born in 1942.
So he's 80 in a week.
No, he would be 81.
81 in a week, yeah.
Okay.
And I'm also pretty sure this is John Williams' last time composing a score for an Indiana Jones movie. As John Williams is even older than Harrison Ford.
It's hard to believe that these iconic people who have been around for so long and have given us has given us and a lot of other people plenty of joy over the years. Now it's they're just this is their exit strategy.
As far as John Williams goes, and keep in mind, folks, this man his first big break was playing the piano for famous composer Jerry Goldsmith, who's no longer with us, during the 1950s. And John Williams won his first Oscar in 1969 for Fiddler with the Roof. And
really?
Yes, and John Williams holds the record for most Oscar nominations. Okay, which makes a lot of sense because he scored so many movies.
Yeah,
he probably can't even tell you off the top of his head how many movies he scored.
And I tell you this too. We all think about Superman, Star Wars, Indiana Jones, E.T., but
Jurassic Park.
But when I could just be watching certain movies and like his name will pop up, music composed by John Williams. I'm like, there's another one. There's another John Williams score. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I like movies that not a lot of people think of that John Williams composed for, like the World War II movie Midway.
Right.
And he also composed for the lesser known hidden gem that Steven Spielberg directed, 1941,
Right.
The insane comedy that had members of the original SNL cast and an SCTV cast together on screen, including John Belushi in the unforgettable performance as Major Wild Bill Kelso.
Right.
John Williams composed for that movie as well, which was kind of different. The way it contrasted, John Williams composing for the movie Midway, and you had some of the Japanese actors who played, some of the famous Japanese naval officers from the Battle of Midway reprised their roles as the crew of the submarine in the movie 1941, where their stoic nature as, portraying Japanese military officers in World War II is turned into comedy in the movie 1941,
Right.
So it's an interesting contrast with, those two movies, one being Midway being serious, 1941 being a comedy, okay, a crazy comedy. John Williams composing for both those movies.
All right. But you also saw a movie without me this week.
Oh, I did.
I sound so accusing, don't I? You saw a movie
I did.
without me.
You were at work, and I try my best to get my money's worth out of my AMC A-list membership, which I pay only $21.99 a month, and I can see up to 3 movies a week without paying admission, and that includes the movies in IMAX, Dolby, 3D.
Right.
Just reserve on the app and walk right in, and they scan it. The movie I saw is called The Sound of Freedom, and it's a low budget movie that was very well done, and I can say this because I've worked on several movie productions.
There's also a lot of low budget movies that are pretty darn good.
Yes.
They just get overlooked, but they're
Right.
pretty darn good.
Yeah. So The Sound of Freedom, the best part about it is that it is a true story. It is a true crime story because it is the true story of ICE agent Tim Ballard's part of his career, which for ICE, what he's doing essentially is tracking down consumers of child porn. Okay, who are who are also illegal immigrants. It seems. Okay, so it's but essentially, I'm trying not to give anything away here. So it's the true story of how Special Agent Tim Ballard managed to go above and beyond the call of duty and actually recover a brother and sister who had been abducted from Honduras and ended up in Colombia. Okay, and he recovered. Before he was done, he recovered hundreds of kids of Latin American kids who had been abducted and trafficked, and it's all true. And
and I also
just before the final I'm sorry, sweet. Just before the final credits roll, you see footage of the actual raids where he had worked with Colombian authorities to take down these traffickers.
And I also want to point out that a lot of these kids and even women who are trafficked, they're not white. Okay, they are like you said, Ryan, Latin American kids, black children, Asian women. It does not tend to be white women or white kids.
Right. Now, of note, Special Agent Tim Ballard is very much Anglo, as his family is. His wife, blonde hair, blue eyes. Okay.
Played by Mira Sorvino.
Yeah, but that didn't matter to him. Okay, because the way he saw it is this is somebody's children. He has several children himself. He and his wife, and at one point he resigns. He resigns from ICE to continue doing what he's doing in Colombia.
Also sounds like it's a very dangerous life to live.
Tim Ballard is one of the bravest men ever to live because not I'm not giving anything away, but yes, you see this movie, The Sound of Freedom. You're going to get very nervous for his character because there's times in this movie where he is risking everything. He's already risked his career. He's risked losing his family. Okay, because obviously, let's say if you wind up in a divorce because you can't be with your family, you lose your family. Okay, he risks his life for certain because certain Colombians are not people to be crossed. So highly recommended. A great true crime movie.
An international true crime movie.
Yes, yes. And above everything, the movie calls attention to the tremendous international crime of child trafficking, which at this point I believe it's like $150 billion a year industry.
I tell you what, if you had absolutely no scruples, no morals whatsoever, and you need some fast cash, you do that. You make some money, but the thing is, you could not have any ethics.
No, and believe it or not, there's narco drug dealers who don't like child traffickers. Ironically, and there have been instances where former narco drug dealers and even current narco drug dealers have cooperated with authorities to bring down child traffickers.
Right.
Child traffickers are just so bad, so despicable that even the narcos can't stand them.
Yeah, it's kind of like if a child molester goes to prison and is released in the general population. Bad things tend to happen to that person.
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Yeah,
but
that's considered to be just about like the most despicable and most horrible thing you could do is to harm a child.
Yes. But today we're for the episode proper, we are not talking about children.
Right. But just one more time, it's called The Sound of Freedom.
And we're not sponsored by The Sound of Freedom either.
No, we're not.
No, we're not. But today we are talking about injustice, racial inequality, and we're going back to the year 1900.
Wow. So year 1900, there's definitely some former slaves still alive.
Absolutely.
Definitely children of former slaves with memories.
Slavery was within living memory at this time. Now, a lot of times I think that we kind of tend to forget that in today's time period, there are still people who have living memory of the civil rights movement.
Yes.
And this is well before the civil rights movement. Okay. Louisiana was a slave society before the American Civil War. There's a lot of large cotton and sugarcane plantations, and they employed hundreds of enslaved individuals. In New Orleans, the population during this time period, the year 1900, consisted of approximately 208,946 white people and 77,714 African Americans. A lot of them were mixed race individuals known as Creoles of color. And you can imagine that racial tensions at this time were not great. How many years after was this from the Civil War? What year did the Civil War end?
Civil War ended in, I believe, 1964.
Okay.
1964, 65, there was still some fighting going on in 65 because it was guerrilla groups. Like in 65, you had some guerrilla groups who disobeyed General Robert E. Lee's orders to cease fighting.
So it's about 44 or 45 years after that.
Yes, the worst of the worst disobeyed General Robert E. Lee's orders to cease fighting.
Mm. So, but racial tensions were not great at this time. In 1898, they passed a new Louisiana state constitution. And this, of course, aimed to disenfranchise black people. Of course. Of course. There were measures such as poll taxes and literacy tests. There was the implementation of Jim Crow laws.
Yes, Jim Crow laws, which of course included anti-gun laws aimed at primarily disarming African Americans, making sure that African Americans did not have any ability to defend themselves with firearms, and of course, in addition to breaking other Jim Crow laws, there's just no telling what would happen to an African American man if caught with a gun, with a firearm.
Well, we might get it. We're going to actually, we'll get there. How about that? um, these laws also, this was a time when in public places, there was blacks only, whites only entrances. There were separate water fountains, separate bathrooms.
Yes, because of course we all know the way that you interact with other cultures is just to stay your distance. Don't get to know anybody.
Yeah, just stand there drooling like an idiot.
Yeah.
Just do that.
Yeah. And don't make any mistake, folks. There were reasonable-minded people just like us who existed back then, who defied all that stuff.
But they also were not as publicly vocal about it as you have the right to be today. You had a right to be vocal back then about it.
If you were white and you were male.
If you were white and you were male.
Yeah.
Yes,
yeah.
That's exactly it.
Yeah, because I don't think women had the right to vote even at that point either.
No,
right?
not yet. No,
yeah.
no, they did not. So, but also these laws included interstate railroad cars because they were under federal law. So it was also federal desegregation. Then, after that, the legislature passed 8 more Jim Crow laws by 1900. The historian William Ivy Hare wrote, "Signs of increasing animosity between the races were to be seen almost daily in New Orleans during June and July of 1900. Both the police and the press received an unprecedented number of complaints." And so this was 123 years ago. Okay, because we are recording this episode in July right now. It was a very different New Orleans back then.
Yes, that was a time, and unfortunately this time lasted longer than it should. Yeah, that was a time when you could contact for police for assistance if a black man was walking on your street. Just walking on your street.
And New Orleans newspapers also played a role in fanning the flames of racial tensions. Journalists like Henry J. Hearsay, Hearsay, yeah. He propagated racist views, which contributed to the growing animosity. He was a former major in the Confederate Army, and he said in one article that if Negroes listen to the screeds of agitators in the North, the result will be a race war, and race war means extermination. Then the Negro problem of Louisiana at least will be solved, and that by extermination. Now, what does that sound like to you, Brian?
That sounds like something that would start to take hold in Germany about 30 years later.
About 30 years later.
Yes.
You remember how we've talked before about, Hitler got some of his ideas from us. This is where he got his ideas from.
Yeah, some of Hitler admired. You see, prior to America entering the war, Hitler had great admiration for America, and it wasn't even for the right reasons at all. It was because he admired the way that America disposed of Native Americans and took the lands, and he also admired the enslavement of black people, of Africans, and fueling the early industrialization that took place in the South, and of course he admired the rapid industrialization that was taking place in northern parts of America. Mm-hmm. Okay. Whereas post actually, well, during the period of slavery and then post slavery, you had working class people of a variety of races up north
Yeah.
being exploited, taken advantage of, and worked to death in many instances in factories, including children, because there were no child labor laws.
No, there were not.
Yeah. So suffice it to say, north or south, if you were enslaved or if you were a working class person barely getting by, life was literally hell for you in the north and the south, especially up north in the factories. And so these early 1900s, yes, this rapid industrialization that has little to no regulation, and what little regulation there is, you have corruption, you have bribery going on.
Well, you know what
with
they
these
say,
federal inspectors,
that safety regulations are written in blood.
Exactly.
People had to die to get those regulations in place.
Well, that is correct. That's correct. Right. Recommended reading along those lines. The book is called The Jungle.
Upton Sinclair.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
It's also it's also a pretty gnarly book. I mean, you will never look at sausage the same way again. I'm just going to say that.
Or hot dogs.
Or hot dogs, yeah.
Remember, we read the book. We discussed it in 10th grade history class. Yes, I joked. Say, I wish I were an Oscar Mayer wiener.
Oh, Brian. No, bad.
Yeah, because people ended up in a hot dog vat sometimes back then. That's not a joke. It actually happened.
No, it's not a joke. It's just horrible kind of horrifying to think about. But
yes, it is. Thankfully, we don't have to eat hot dogs these days with the concern of any portion of a human being being in them.
But this is the time period that all this was taking place in. This is the stage in which the following events unfolded. Robert Charles was a self-educated and articulate activist. He arrived in New Orleans from Mississippi, and he believed in self-defense for the African American community and advocated for African Americans to move to Liberia to escape racial discrimination. Which, at the time, that this was what he believed to be best. That you just get out of America if you can.
Now Liberia was founded by former slaves who left the United States. Is that correct?
I am not sure.
I think so.
All right. Well, if anybody hears this, and if we're wrong, you just let us know. Because one thing the internet never has a problem with is letting people know when they're wrong.
Yeah.
So on the night of July the 23rd, 1900, a confrontation occurred when 3 white police officers, Sergeant Jules Oakwin, August Mora, and Joseph Cantrell, which are all 3 last names that we're very familiar with here in New Orleans.
Also pronounced Oakwin.
Oh, I only hear Oakwin.
Yeah, I knew Lieutenant Oakwin in the New Orleans Police Department. That's how I pronounce his name.
Well, yeah. They investigated reports of 2 suspicious-looking Negroes sitting on a porch in a predominantly white neighborhood.
How dare they do that?
Yes, how terrible. The men were Robert Charles and his roommate Leonard Pierce. The situation quickly escalated. Robert Charles did have a gun, as a matter of fact. There was an exchange of gunfire, and Robert Charles was hit, and he fled, and he left behind a trail of blood. Of course, word of this spread like wildfire. Okay, all throughout the city, which made people upset. I mean, even more upset on both sides. So the following day, just the white crowds were gathering. They were demanding the lynching of Robert Charles.
Yes. How dare he carry a handgun for self-defense? Only white men should carry a handgun for self-defense, right?
That's right.
Right, yeah.
Right, yeah.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
So, so the following day they were advocating for the lynching of Robert Charles, which, this was at a time when lynching was very commonplace. It happened to a lot of people.
Yes, and the people who committed the lynchings, what their feeble minds could not understand is that if lynching anybody is allowed, okay, then that means anybody can be lynched.
Right.
Meaning, theoretically, even if you are white and you get into a disagreement with the wrong person, and they're people, you could be lynched too. Okay, just keep in mind, African Americans were not the only people lynched in America.
But they were the majority.
Yeah, yes, but anyone who pissed off the wrong person could be lynched for anything. You didn't have to be guilty of any crime. All you had to do
Was exist
and make the wrong person angry, and then if that person was a mean and hateful, sadistic, cruel person with friends willing to back them up, okay, you could be lynched, and you didn't have to do anything. You didn't have to commit a crime. In fact, the odds are, if you were lynched back then, you probably didn't commit a crime.
You're probably right.
All you had, the people just had to think you did. Okay, so lynching can't be allowed, because if lynching is allowed, then anybody can get lynched. No due process.
And this is the mentality that we're still fighting against today.
Yeah, there's still people today who want to lynch people.
Mm-hmm. But in the aftermath of this shooting, riots happened all throughout the city. There were plenty of deaths and injuries, both African Americans and white people. Robert Charles took refuge in a house, and he was spotted going into this house. Police surrounded him, and he began to engage in a standoff with them. The situation was dire. The mayor called upon a state militia, and they deployed Gatling guns on this house.
Oh God! Oh. And now you see. Now let's keep in mind that was the state militia back then was citizens who were simply available to assist law enforcement during a time of emergency. Okay. The militia's never been the National Guard or the Air National Guard ever. Okay, just to briefly explain that National Guard is part of the United States Army, and the Air National Guard is part of the United States Air Force. They are not state militias.
Right.
Just to be clear.
The situation grew so desperate that a fire captain and other volunteers snuck into the first floor of the house where Robert Charles was, and they ignited the mattress. The smoke from the mattress forced Robert Charles out of the house, and as he tried to escape, he was shot by Charles A. Noretz. He was a medical student and a member of the Special Police, and they just continued to shoot him over and over again. And it was at this point when they dragged his body outside.
So they probably shot him even after he went down.
They did. It was very cruel what they did to him, because after he was shot, they dragged his body outside for the mob. And the mob just beat his body.
People in that mob, of course, who've been lied to about what happened. And also keep in mind, it's when you're law enforcement and you're shooting someone, you're shooting to stop them from doing what they're doing, not shooting to kill them. So that's especially bad if law enforcement, even then, yes, law enforcement shoots someone after they go down. That's not supposed to happen.
Yes. The aftermath of the Robert Charles riots were devastating. African American residents faced renewed attacks, and white mobs targeted black communities. The events received national attention and had lasting consequences, and this wound up leading to increased racial segregation. So none of this helped anything. Ultimately, it just served to make things worse for a long time. Okay, a long time. Police actually had difficulty taking Robert Charles's body to the morgue because they kept trying to mutilate his, or kept trying to mutilate his corpse.
Yeah, because a bunch of these idiots believed the lies they were told.
And mobs also killed several African American citizens. They burned down the Tommy LaFond schoolhouse, which was known as the best Negro schoolhouse in Louisiana. And by the next morning, the special police and state militia had brought the city under control. Several days later, Louis Forstall murdered a man named Fred Clark. And he murdered him because Fred Clark was the person who tipped the police off to where Robert Charles was. Okay, so this was a vengeance killing. You know, people said people were very angry. It was trying to be eye for an eye, and ultimately more people died because of that. In total, Robert Charles killed 7 people over the course of the week. 4 of them were policemen. The exact number of black casualties at the hands of white mobs is unknown, but most sources report more than a dozen black people killed and over 50 wounded. These events, of course, as I mentioned earlier, they received national coverage, and they had ramifications beyond the state of Louisiana. Lillian Jewett was a young white member of the Anti-Lynching League. And it said lynching was so bad they had to have an anti-lynching league. Just sit with that for a second.
Yeah.
It was so bad that you had to have a group to advocate against it.
Yeah, the fair-minded people of the time. Yes.
Yeah. But Lillian Jewett was fundraising at a Boston, Massachusetts meeting just hours after Robert Charles's death to raise money for the injured in New Orleans. The Louisiana Times-Picayune, who was just intent upon fanning these flames, reported this as insane ravings at a Boston meeting.
Huh.
Okay? And a group of wealthy young white men from New Orleans had formed the Green Turtles the previous year. This group required an oath of allegiance to white supremacy, and because of this group's threats on Lillian Jewett's life, she would not travel further south than Richmond, Virginia. Okay, so this, when you hear about people making death threats today to politicians or news anchors or actresses, or even recently I was reading about how a weatherman has had to change jobs because people were threatening him because he was talking about climate change. Okay, all that, it's just ridiculous. I mean, look, it really is annoying at best to hear about these things. But if you really, really think about it, okay, there's people out there who have nothing better to do with their time than to just sit there and go, you know what, I'm going to email this person a death threat.
Yes. Let's just spend our time engaging in culture wars.
Yeah.
Okay. As you can see, this was this was an earlier culture war that took place in our country.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, back then, probably because, of course, there wasn't any means of mass communications like social media. Okay. A lot of the back and forth that goes on social media today was literally taking place on the streets back then. And of course, and unfortunately, much of it turned into fighting words.
Yes.
So, it's a time when, prior to all that mass communication technology, there were a lot more riots. That's why there were a lot more riots early on in our history.
Right. Yes.
Than today. Because although we've had a few in recent memory, but riots way back when were a lot more numerous because of this. Communication back then was either through occasional use of a telephone, telegram, newspapers, at some point radio, okay, and but primarily in person. Okay,
Right.
just like all the fights that took place and the rioting that took place in early 1920s Germany.
Mm-hmm.
These fights between loyalists to the German state, fascists, and communists. Okay, these people were encountering each other in German beer halls and arguing, and then it would spill into the streets, and people would get beaten up, knifed, bludgeoned, shot. It
Right.
was horrible. And adding fuel to the fire, um, Nazi SA brown shirts roll up in a Mercedes Benz truck, jump out the truck with billy clubs, and start beating the tar out of anyone who isn't a fascist.
I just want to point
You
out
know,
that what
so
you just said about the brown shirts just rolling up and beating people with billy clubs,
yeah,
that's not too far off from getting a mob of your buddies to go lynch somebody.
right, right. It's the same thing. Yes,
And both ultimately have the same result.
yeah.
Somebody dies at the end,
Mm-hmm.
and that's not a good thing.
Bloodshed, hatred, a desire for revenge.
Now, Now, in 1908, the state legislature passed a law that prohibited interracial marriage or domestic partnerships. Now, it does need to be pointed out that these laws were almost never enforced in cases of white men having relations with black women. Okay, but if it was the other way around, oh no 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 no, black men could not be with white women, but it was perfectly okay for a white man to do whatever he wanted with a black woman.
Oh, of course,
Okay.
because of course, is a upstanding, white male.
Yeah, but it's also when to bring this up, it's also about saying that people don't have agency, like they don't have the ability to choose who they can marry. Okay, so you're the only one who really has any agency here is white men, when really everybody has agency.
Yeah.
Okay.
Although that's not white men as long as they're not Irish, I believe. Yeah.
Well, I'm not.
I mean, it's
I'm not certain.
different discussion. Yeah.
Yeah, it is a different
Yeah.
discussion. It is. And those laws in particular, though, they were influenced by the European ideas on eugenics. So you see, it really wasn't so different. Those views are not really so different after all. One influenced the other, and vice versa. I
Yeah.
actually do spend quite a bit of time about how Hitler got a lot of his ideas from how America treated black people.
Right. Right.
Okay?
You see, and then there's another thing Hitler recognized about America prior to the 1930s was that essentially, the descendants of European Anglo-Saxon types, were
Right.
ruling America, were ruling over the, ruling over what was left of the Native Americans and the quote Negro population. Okay, so he admired how America had engaged in the way the way America had committed genocide here and there. But what he also admired about America was the manifest destiny. Okay, America dominating parts of South Central America and the Caribbean.
Right.
Sugar companies dominating the Caribbean.
Yes.
And even using the United States Marine Corps to enforce this, as touched upon by retired Commandant of the Marine Corps Smedley Butler, who wrote a tell-all book after he retired, and even touched upon this in his retirement speech, because at that point he was retiring and he could talk candidly about some of the stuff he was doing.
Right.
You know, um,
And we are going to, and I'm just going to circle back here to Dial of Destiny, because My big takeaway from that movie is that you cannot live in the past.
Yeah, when you see the movie, you'll understand what we're talking
Yeah,
about.
you'll understand what I mean when you do see the movie. That you cannot live in the past. You need to go forward. You need to get rid of these ideas that you're somehow better than another person because you're white or you're straight or whatever it is. Because we're all people in this world. We all are supposed to share the planet. Okay, sharing is something you should have learned in kindergarten. If you haven't learned it in kindergarten, you might never learn it.
Yes.
Okay? And I just felt like it was important to talk about this today because we are living in a time right now where we are. I mean, it is a very slippery slope right now with certain people who have been elected, certain people who continue to be elected. Elections are always important. Make sure that you vote in every one of them, even if it's just like one or two people, one or two positions on the ballot. If it's a judge,
Yeah,
clerk
even
of
if you
court,
just voted
whatever
for
it
a
is.
judge. Take a few minutes to do an internet search of the candidates running for judge. And, if you're one of those people who don't appreciate low bails being set as a favor to bail bondsmen for, certain violent offenders who seem to be in and out of jail, can't stay out of trouble, can't stop victimizing people, and you see one of these people running for judge, and you don't want to vote for this person, well, that's how you do an internet search. That's how you find out, and you go ahead and vote against that judge, because those are the types of judges that literally get people killed.
Yes, exactly.
And
that is what happens.
And this kind of thing's been happening over and over in New Orleans. People dying because certain offenders are let out on the street pre-trial or permitted bail.
Oh, well, for violent crimes.
For
right.
violent crimes,
right?
yes.
Like if it's
violent
something,
crimes.
Not violent, and non-violent crimes do exist.
That's the majority of offenders are non-violent offenders. Bail is just fine for those people, but violent offenders, no, there shouldn't. Violent offenders should not be given bail. Although that's granted bail, that's a separate discussion. But the tendency is when you grant bail to a violent offender, while they're out on bail awaiting trial, they rob other people, they kill people. It's happened time and time again.
And it happens not just in New Orleans either.
Right.
This is everywhere where you have people in power that can be corrupt or they can be bought off, kind of like our Supreme Court right now. The Supreme Court, supposed to be the law of the land, has recently decided to just screw over a lot of people on different levels. So not a good job that you were doing there, Supreme Court, and all this stuff that's been coming out about Justice Clarence Thomas and how he's received quote rewards from donors and whatnot. It's like it's quite obvious to me what you're doing, guys. Like, you're very transparent, you're not clever, you're not sneaky, we all see you. So pull up your pants and stop taking bribes, because that's what you're actually doing. Even though it's not technically a bribe, it is actually, in fact, a bribe.
Yeah.
Okay?
So yeah, it frightens us, and it should frighten you
Everybody.
as a listener that fascism's on the rise again.
Yeah, and this little, this piece of history that we shared with you today, I mean, I don't want that to happen again. I don't want people to just be beaten in the street just because. I don't want people dragged out of their beds to be lynched just because somebody else feels like it. Or even the equivalent of that. Whatever it is. Just, so this is why it's always important to vote. It's important to volunteer. It's important to get to know your neighbors. It's just important. It's important to remember that we're all human beings sharing this planet.
Yes, it's important to...
And we all have a right to be here.
It's important to engage different cultures. Mm-hmm. You see, segregation created all that violence.
It did.
Okay, because being separated from different cultures creates fear.
And fear leads to anger, and anger leads to hate, and hate leads to suffering. And I don't think we'll ever get out of an episode without a Star Wars reference.
Yeah, I doubt it myself. Um, yes, it's important to remember in the absence of communication, there is confrontation.
Right.
Like if you go through life just looking at your neighbors as you're, doing stuff outside, not talking to them, not even waving to them, just looking at them, and then they do the same. That's when your head starts to play tricks on you. To like,
That's when you start to go squirrely.
That's when you start to go squirrely. You start to be thinking, well, what is that person thinking? They're just looking at me. Oh wait, something happened. Was it them? Did they do it?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
My trash can was flattened and it's in the street. It was run over by some big truck. Was it them? They never talked to me. So it breeds paranoia.
It does exactly that. So don't be paranoid.
Yeah, don't be shy with your neighbors. Talk to your neighbors.
Yeah.
Engage your neighbors.
You don't have to be best friends, but you do have to live next door to each other.
Yes, and you'll feel better. You will feel much better if you get to know your neighbors better. You will. You will. Now, knowledge is power. If you get to know somebody even just a little bit, you're not going to be as afraid of them as you might be.
Oh, and guys, everybody, y'all, read a book instead of maybe emailing emailing a weatherman to yell at him about climate change. Why don't you read a book instead?
Yeah.
If you can read Twitter, you can read books.
Yeah, so true.
Okay. So everybody, until then. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't even say what we're doing next week. Y'all, next week I have something that's close to a hometown murder for me. Something I did not even hear about until recently, even though this happened quite a few years ago. Our area had its very own Black Widow.
Wow.
Wow, yes. So next week we're going to be talking about the Black Widow and Gates. Okay, yeah. It's going to be interesting. So everybody, join us next week. And until then, be safe, be kind. Remember that we're all human beings. Don't let fascism into your life, and don't park next to vans.
And if it's dark, it's dangerous, and you don't feel it's safe, don't be there in the first place. Okay? And if you are being questioned by law enforcement and you are not the victim or the witness to a crime, lawyer up and drive carefully. Don't get yourself pulled over in the first place.
And stop at red lights.